Wow, at least that presentation gave me energy. I hope you feel the same and inspiration. And I think the 4 pillars that Martina talked about, nature, diversity, sustainability, and technology might be something that we will touch upon. I hope we will touch upon it during this conversation as well. I would like to start with you, Elina, as a politician, member of parliament. How important is it for you to sort of emphasize Nordic values and, like, on the political scene, what are those values? Do these 4 pillars describe them, or?
Actually, pretty well. Well, I must say, in the past few weeks and months, because I've been working very much on European issues in the Conference for the Future of Europe, I've been talking a lot about the European way of life, which to me is something very, very, I would say, so important that it kind of defines me. But looking deeper into it, I think in the Nordics it's even more authentic, in the sense that very much what kind of came out of this fantastic presentation as well, that we are very kind of grounded, we are authentic, we are these no-nonsense people, where basically all of the value is in human capital, because we didn't have anything else up here. It was cold. We had to prepare for the worst. We still have to. So I guess that defines us a lot. So we put focus on people, we put focus on human capital, which I think defines the future.
And, when you work internationally, are there any sort of stereotypes or misunderstandings that you have to fight? How do the people you interact with, how do they see us up here?
Well, let's take the positive way today. I think this exactly this, that we kind of, first of all, what we say that can be trusted. So we don't perhaps say so much, but what we say we truly mean. To the extent that even in business, we perhaps don't overpromise, or we don't even promise anything. Exactly. So I guess that applies in politics as well. But I must say, on a concrete level, actually, in the past few weeks or after the war break, I've been also giving quite many interviews to the international media. Quite many people have asked, how has sort of Finland managed between the East and the West? And I always start the interview by explaining, well, first of all, we are not between the East and the West, only geographically, perhaps. But we are a Western country. We have been a stable democracy for over 100 years. And we are not neutral, because we are members of the European Union. We are very much tied to the European value base, and a Nordic country, in effect.
So, Anna Romberg, you hold a very senior position within Getinge. You work from Helsinki and Gothenburg. Split your time. You are also a co-founder of something called the Nordic Business Ethic Initiative. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is and why you founded that, and what do you want to achieve?
Yes, I would be happy to, and really delighted to be on this distinguished panel as well with all of you. So the Nordic Business Ethics Initiative was really born out of perhaps my personal experiences. I have been working with Nordic companies basically all my career. Spent many years at Telia, for example, and I felt that we have quite one-sided discussions on Nordic companies and how ethical we are. I think isn't it usually so that sort of our strength, which is the trust and openness, can also be a disadvantage. And I felt together with Nina Ratsula, who is the other co-founder, that we wanted to have more fact-based discussions on business ethics. And that's why we founded this initiative. We've done some surveys, we do research, we have different events, just to equip Nordic companies to become better and more ethical. And also our ultimate aim is obviously that it's something we see that the world also would need.
Because I guess this is one of the areas, at least when I think about it, that, you know, of course, the Nordics in general come out very well if you look at sort of, you know, levels of corruption, they are fairly low and so on and so forth. But still, despite that, and that I think that is how we see ourselves, that like we are free from corruption. But again and again, you read about companies that are from the Nordics and they end up in pretty dirty situations. So is that, how should we tackle that?
Well, I would first like to point out that you're probably referring to the Transparency International survey, where we are, I mean, the least corrupt countries in the world, in the Nordics, and that really measures the perceived corruption in the public sector. And last time I renewed my passport, I didn't have to bribe. We have a very transparent public sector. We have independent media. We have a fair judicial system. But that's here at home. But when I was alluding to this trust aspect, when it can become a disadvantage, is that I think sometimes, and where we see these scandals happening, is when we go to a different context, where there are not these strong institutions, there are not free media, there are not strong judicial system. The governance is sort of lacking, and we are so used to operating this system. When we go abroad, sometimes we get lost, and I think that's what we see. We perhaps too easily trust and don't have the right governance in place in our companies to be able to tackle challenges in challenging markets. And
you told me ahead of this conversation that one shouldn't over-rely on being Nordic or Nordic values. Can you elaborate on that? I found it interesting.
Yeah, well, that's what I've heard working with Nordic companies, you know, is that, but we are from the Nordics. We don't have issues with corruption. You know, why do we have to invest in compliance, for example? And, you know, we just isn't doing the right thing, just common sense. And that was even the name of my PhD dissertation, you know, isn't it common sense to do the right thing? But we cannot underestimate the complexities. Like, think of the situation we have been talking a lot today about Ukraine and Russia. It's full of dilemmas. It's very complex. We cannot expect our colleagues in Russia or in challenging markets to just do the right thing. And also, even if you are from the Nordics, you are placed in that context, it's going to be challenging. So yeah, we cannot only rely on our values, but need to have the discussions, the proper systems, and yeah.
I want to bring Rachel Samrén into the conversation as well. Rachel has a long but very prominent title. She's an SVP, Chief External Affairs, Governance and Trust Officer with Telia. And in addition, Rachel has lived in the US and plenty of European countries. She has done business all over the world, both for Telia, but also in previous capacities. So she has a very sort of looking from the outside in on the Nordics, even though you are Swedish. Welcome, Rachel. I like this with trust officer. I've heard many innovative titles, but you're the first trust officer I meet. Why do you need a trust officer?
Well, a very good question. You're the first one to ask that, actually, for over a year and a bit since joining Telia. And actually, it's a title that covers an awful lot of functions, many of those that we're talking about here. So it covers communication, sustainability, governance, risk, compliance, ethics.
You must be busy.
I am, but I have a great team. So, you know, when you have a great team, you can sit and discuss these very important topics. And the reason we chose that title is because it really captures, I think, very much where we are today. And I mean, even before the Ukraine invasion, where we are in the world, where everything comes down to really that intersection of who are we, what do we stand for, how do we behave, and it's a combination of, you know, how are you seen in that external world, how do you behave in that external world, part of which is ensuring the right government, ensuring the right policies, the right systems, but also ensuring that, first of all, your own employees trust that, but secondly, that you gain the trust. If we don't have the trust of our consumers, whether that is individuals or whether that's enterprises or of our stakeholders, whether that's our shareholders or society at large, then we're nothing, right? So it's really encapsulating very much, we thought, the sign of the times that companies are no longer companies that you just have a transactional service with. Companies are companies that you really want to trust, that you feel are there for you in good and bad, and that look after your interest and put you at the center of what they do.
So from a business perspective, perspective, is it good for Telia being a Nordic company?
Absolutely. I would say being a Nordic company, and not just based on my experience at Telia, because I have spent at least the last, like you said, US companies, British companies, but also the last 10 years for majority Swedish owned and Swedish listed, Stockholm listed companies in emerging markets in Africa and Latin America, as well as now in the Nordics and the Baltics. And it is absolutely a differentiator. I think very much because of those values that we've touched on, openness, transparency, honesty, inclusion, equality, those are perceived by sort of the counterparties that you deal with as something that comes with best intent. And best intent, in turn, builds trust. And that trust then, in turn, allows for partnerships. So that's one angle of it. And I would say the other, certainly in our sector, the technology sector, we've heard from what we've done, from the partnerships with the Ericssons and the Nokias, and with those partnerships coming from this region that is highly digitalized, that has very savvy consumer behavior, innovation, as we've heard, that really allows you a seat at the table because they think of you as someone that can help them both actually move forward from a pure digital perspective, but also in a manner that they look up to.
So when we talked ahead, we talked a little bit about sort of how Telia works with diversity, and I know that you emphasize LGBT rights quite a bit, isn't it correct? Yeah. And then, I thought about you're active across the Nordics, and I'm including the Baltic states in when I say the Nordics, and I guess that Sweden and maybe some of the Baltic states have fairly different, mainstream opinions are different on these. How do you handle that in an international company?
No, you're absolutely right, and it's been fascinating for me for coming, especially also from being more really emerging or frontier markets where the contrast is much larger, thinking that perhaps here it's more similar, but there are big differences, and then especially, as you said, something like LGBTQI, where we have spent a lot of our time. In one of our Baltic countries, it's only a couple of years ago where we said, well, this is what we stand for, and we should stand for the same wherever we are, and chose to then be part of really the large Pride campaign that year. And the question that came up from some employees thought it was fantastic, and other stakeholders said, you're out of your mind, because it's not something that is necessarily quite as advanced across the whole region yet. But that is exactly where I think in today's world, companies come in and have not just an opportunity, but a responsibility to really help drive these values.
Thank you. That is super, super interesting. And I guess a lot of companies are actually facing the same kind of challenges. I just saw a new question popping up here, and I will take that. And then you have to go back because there was a previous one that I also wanted to ask, but stay with the Ericsson one. Because I guess this is the Ericsson one is to all of the panel, but primarily probably Anna and maybe Rachel. Do you have some advice to our friends in Ericsson?
Yes, a lot. I don't know if I'm going to say all of it here, but it's really fascinating with these corporate scandals because the media is brutal, and the media has a really, really important role. We see it time and time again when the sort of journalists comes first, and then that was in the Telia case as well. I mean, it was the Uppdrag granskning show also, but and with the banks and so on. The media comes first, and then sort of the law comes afterwards. And here in this Ericsson case, I would say, yes, what they did was horrible. Paying bribes is always wrong, but what's equally bad is not being humble and transparent. And I think that would. My advice is that I understand you can't say everything. I understand there are legal processes ongoing. Trust me, I've been there myself. But say something. Say that something went wrong. And so I think that would help.
Would the US authorities allow them to say that something went wrong?
They would even expect them to do that. That's part of,
Rachel?
Yes, I have to admit that, in this case, as you said, it was very, very difficult when the media comes first. I have myself been in a company where it was the other way around, where we self-reported to the Department of Justice potential improper payments on behalf of a joint venture. So we actually came out with it, and that was allowed for still a lot of crucifixion media, but a completely different debate, but also took that view as much transparency as ever possible and share as much information you can. Absolutely, you can't share what's actually ongoing in the investigation, but there is a statement where you can say that there are investigations ongoing, we are cooperating, we are reviewing our culture, our policies, our procedures, we are working with our staff, because you also have to remember in these situations, as I said, your absolutely most valuable assets are your own staff, and ultimately you can have the best governance structures and policies, but it's also about that culture that allows them to follow those, and you need to look after those. So I think that transparency is so important also towards your staff.
Thank you. Can I get the first question, the one to Elina that disappeared? So we invent a lot and Estonia implements. Could we in the Nordics implement real-time economy to get ahead?
Well, yes.
How?
Love that.
You're asking a politician to do that. Yeah, but come on. I guess, as said, we are extremely innovative here, and we are not the ones who overpromise, or who are not the masters of just selling a deck of slides for any investors, but we actually do sell when we have something tangible. I guess that defines the Nordics very, very, very much. So what we need to do from a political point of view, or from the sort of legal point of view, is to just create an environment where it's easy to take risks, also to fail, where on a personal level it's never like you never end up in a huge mess where you can't recover from. That you are actually incentivized to try out new things, educate yourself, retrain yourself, and take any opportunity there is in different stages of your life. So I think building a innovative environment for companies to flourish is something we need to be working on a massive scale. And also what I'd like to say, because I think what has been said here is very, very good and important, is also that we shouldn't kind of consider that if we put more focus on values or human rights even in the Nordic region, that it's like a handicap. It's not a handicap at all. It's actually a huge asset to build on, and that's something we can most definitely also monetize on in the future.
Before moving on to the next question, I want to follow up on something you said about this sort of risk-taking culture, because my impression is that also from being an entrepreneur myself today, like in Sweden, it's very different compared to 10 or 20 years ago. So, and I guess that is the same in Estonia and Finland with the flourishing startup communities that we have. That being said, spent some time in Silicon Valley a few weeks ago, and it's still a big difference, I must say, when it comes to risk taking and thinking big. And also, if you talk to people from the Nordics in Silicon Valley, they still emphasize that there is a huge difference the way we see risk. So what I wonder is, what could we do to sort of nourish that culture even more? I guess it's both, might be some sort of political reforms, but also more of a sort of cultural evolution.
Yeah. Well, I guess culture comes with also the policies that are in place, and it takes some time. But I think what comes to taking risks, it's kind of a little bit against our nature, because we have been trusting the welfare society to take care of, or to sort of insure ourselves against quite many risks in our lives. And that can't be said to the same level or to the same extent from the US, for instance. But still, people there, or is it because of that, people are willing to take or risk massively, on the personal scale. Compared with us. I think that's something we need to really look into, because I'm sure we can combine these two things. I think the welfare state needs to focus on kind of protecting people instead of protecting industries or companies or regions or whatever. We should concentrate on protecting people, but also on empowering them. I have many ideas, but there's no time to go through all the ideas I would have to do on a political level in this context. But there's a lot we can do, and I think it changes from generation to the next. Even in my lifetime, I'm 40 now. 20 years ago, when I studied at the University of Technology, I studied computer science. Quite many of my fellow students went to, have their form a company, become entrepreneurs. I had a small company of myself, but it wasn't like a huge scene yet. And that has come in the past 10, 15 years.
Anna, you wanted to build on that?
Just short reflection, just because isn't it so that risk and opportunity, it's like the flip side of the same coin? And would it be so that we are also afraid of being very successful, and that's why we don't take so much risk?
Good point. So I think this question is very interesting that we see on the screen now. How to frame a Nordic trust context that includes both Nordic values and the immigrant cultural context we need for human capacity growth. So how do we sort of keep and develop our value base and still welcome other value bases? And also, where are the red lines? Elina.
Well, thanks, because this is a very important topic, and just the place where I came from to here, I said, because we were discussing China, and I said, I'm pretty sure if there was a way, and we can always create the way, we can attract so much talent from, well, of course, China, but from elsewhere in the world, because the quality of life, the way of life here, I mentioned the European way of life, that is a huge asset. I mean, we can see middle-income people in China putting their children into European schools, right? If we just get our economy a little bit, I mean, we need a tiny boost in the European economy and in the tech sector and everything. Also risk-taking, everything what is linked to that, a little bit more market economy next to the the high level of protection, which should focus on humans, as said. But human capital will define the future, and it will define which continent or whichever area is the most successful. And if we can combine a little bit more dynamic on the economy side, we will be able to attract so much talent from elsewhere in the world. I'm looking forward to that, and especially, say, Afghan women.
Rachel.
Well, I think, for us, I think the inclusion and diversity that we have among our employees and staffs within the business context is actually what makes us more successful. We want to have that diversity of mindset, diversity of innovation. And I think you can absolutely, in a business context, combine where you say, well, it's the purpose of the company, it's the culture of the company that applies to all. But we're all inclusive within that, and we all work towards the same goal, and we use the best of ideas, but we do so within a policy framework and a culture and respect for each other that is based on the Nordic values.
Yeah, I was saying there was a question about Russia as well, but maybe you took that away. I can answer that one if you want.
If there is a risk that all, or when all companies withdraw.
Yeah, I think it was said already today, right? But I like one reflection on this, and also to what the earlier speakers have been talking about. I think there is a risk with, we have the hard sanctions that are used as a weapon, so to say, but then we have the self-sanctioning, and that's also kind of a PR thing sometimes, and I think it's this, stakeholder capitalism that we are seeing, that even if a company perhaps would like to stay in Russia and would not be prohibited by law, still decides to go because the public pressure becomes so huge. And it may be the right decision, I'm not saying that, and then for many companies it is probably the right decision to do, but I think we can't be so analog when we talk about this, because how will we react when there will be the next conflict? Like, think China and Taiwan, will everybody pull out of China? I don't think so. So it's not directly responding to this question, but I think, from my perspective, very passionate about business ethics. I think we should really talk about the ethical dilemmas. Stay or leave, okay, now and longer term, and then the consequences for how we do business overall on a global scale.
So it's time to wrap up. And those of you, which are most of you who were here in the morning, knew that we have had so far 3 former prime ministers on stage today. And I said that it would be fun to have a coming prime minister on stage. We'll see if that is Elina Valtonen. So thanks a lot to Elina, Anna, and Rachel.